So today we're delighted to welcome Rabbi Adam Moffat from the Masorti Synagogue in St. Albans. He's here now. Hello, good morning to you, Rabbi.
Good morning, Nana. Thanks for having me in today.
Now, you look so young. I mean, I'm sort of seeing rabbis as really old. But how old are you?
I'm 30.
Really? You look about 15.
Yeah, I know. I get it a lot, actually. And one thing I continue to have to remind people is that rabbis don't come out of seminary with a big beard and automatically looking as wizened as we imagine. They all start out young at some point.
Oh, I see. You'll look like that later, will you?
I expect so. I'm looking forward to it. I expect one day I'll wake up and have a big beard and look the part. But until then, people often ask me, "You sure you're the rabbi?"
You are the rabbi.
I am.
So the Jewish faith, for me, I just thought it's Judaism, and there's not much else in there. It's just one section, but there aren't. So you're Masorti. So what does that mean?
So Masorti means traditional.
Okay.
It's a literal translation from Hebrew. And for us, we're kind of the middle ground in a lot of ways of the Jewish spectrum. It's really a new thing, this idea that there's lots of different Judaisms.
Okay, so is it just, so Judaism is one umbrella?
It's one umbrella, but it's really quite diverse because we don't have any central authority. We don't have anyone dictating how a particular community should behave. So every community does its own thing. So actually, more than just denominations or movements, each synagogue is really its own entity in a lot of ways, and each rabbi makes their own decisions. But we tend to fall into certain sort of streams, at least in the 21st century.
Yes. So what's the difference then? What does your stream of Judaism entail?
It's often thought about like we're kind of the Goldilocks of Judaism, which is true to a certain extent. We're in the middle, and we could describe ourselves as being less traditional than the Orthodox and more traditional than Reform and Liberal. But that's also not really fair just to describe it by what it's not. For us, Masorti is a continuity of traditional Jewish life, because for most of Jewish history, Jewish people were traditional, but they also were open to the world around them. They engaged with the civic society around them. It's only really in the last 200 years that we've had this bifurcated approach to Jewish life, where you either have to be extremely, extremely, extremely traditional and nothing ever changes, or you have to adapt to the world around you entirely. And we refuse to choose. Our suggestion is that you can be traditional and modern, and that the two actually go hand in hand because that's how we've always done it.
So you can take the bits out of the Jewish faith that you want, and that's kind of how yours is.
Yeah, it's not so much a pick and mix because it really is an entity, but if you look inside of the Jewish faith, it's always been a really dynamic, changing thing. It's never been static because our people have had to change and adapt to a lot of different historical circumstances. So what we're trying to do is just continue adapting, continue being dynamic, and as a result, Masorti is the fastest growing denomination in the UK because I think it appeals to people in a way that is renewing and refreshing.
Now, so there are certain things. So obviously, things like you don't eat pork. Does that stay within it, or can you be within the faith and eat pork and things like that? Or
from our point of view, what it means to be Jewish is to try and follow the body of law we call halacha, which means the way. And that includes things like not eating pork, includes things like resting on Shabbat, includes a lot of interpersonal behaviors, how you treat people, how you pay your employers, how you conduct yourself in the world. And it's all one body of things. And obviously no one does it perfectly. It's not an all or nothing toggle switch, but we all try our best. And for us, the assumption is that we're on that path, we're on that way that's so important to us.
Your services then at the Masorti Synagogue, would they be very similar to the ones of the Judaism kind of thing, or do you have something that's different in your service? So, for example, you've got we've got Church of England and Roman Catholic, and there's a difference when you take communion. There's different things. So, are there differences in things like that, or
less so than you would see in Christian denominations? Because for Judaism, our different streams really aren't about belief as much. They're more about practice and about how we philosophically see the tradition. So our service looks a lot like you'd see in Orthodox, except for one major big distinction, which is that we're totally egalitarian in terms of gender. So
what does that mean?
Men and women sit together, men and women participate equally, women lead services, we have female rabbis in the movement, and for us it's no distinction whatsoever between male and female congregants.
I didn't realise. So in the Orthodox Jewish belief system, why is that different? So you can't sit with a woman, or men and women can't sit together?
So if you go to an Orthodox synagogue, you'd see a separation of gender. Men and women sit separately. And unfortunately, the distinction tends to preference men due to patriarchy and a variety of other factors. where the Torah will actually be in the men's side, or the women will actually sit upstairs as opposed to equally divided. And it often becomes a really negative thing for a lot of women because they can't really access the tradition. So we don't see that as being a necessary part of the tradition. It's something that we think got added a bit later. And for us, we're willing to experiment and move and change in a way to include everyone of any gender in the service equally. And that's the biggest distinction, that a lot of people, if they've grown up in an Orthodox synagogue, come into ours and are a bit taken aback by looking around and seeing women wearing kippot or women sitting and participating in a way that they'd expect men to do.
Yes, I was wondering what the reaction would be like for others who come in and see that.
It's mixed. I think for some people it's really empowering, for some people it's really scary. And we have a variety of people from different points of view who come in, and it really is a very diverse community because of that. Everyone comes in with their own history and their own perspective.
So it's not really a breakaway sort of sect of Judaism. It's just a slightly more flexible form of Judaism.
Yeah, I mean, it started in the UK as kind of a protest movement because a rabbi named Louis Jacobs, who was slated to be chief rabbi, which is all in the Orthodox movement, he was kind of blackballed at the last minute from the job because he suggested that we should be able to maybe have a conversation about talking about some difficult issues. He wasn't saying any heretical beliefs, and not that we really have any. He was suggesting that we just need to talk about it. And for that, he was really isolated. And that upset a lot of people, enough that they said, let's just do it our way. Let's just leave all that behind and start trying to make a traditional type of Jewish life that doesn't have all of that baggage with it. And it's really caught on from his one community to now we have over a dozen communities across the UK, and we're growing faster than any other.
Oh, wow.
Which is exciting because it means that we're doing something right, I think. When religion is shrinking and you're growing.
Do you think that perhaps having these, it's becoming more secular then because you're creating another sect within another sect, so Judaism, but then you've got a sect within that sect and do you think that it's quite divisive?
It is. It absolutely is. But it's always been that way. I mean, it's absolutely ridiculous that the Jewish people, who are one of the smallest ethnic groups on earth, it's only 15 million of us, really, by a generous count, but yet we've always been divided into all different groups, ethnic groups, linguistic groups, cultural groups, and no one's ever been able to agree on anything. So although it seems very, I know it's ridiculous, for a religion that bases itself on arguing, it kind of makes sense, right? Because everything is about questioning the text and authority and debate. It's natural that there would be a variety of different approaches to the faith and that they would often be in conflict with each other. But we hope it's a productive conflict, one that helps us to grow. There's an idea in Hebrew that you can have a machloket l'shem shemayim, which means an argument for the sake of heaven. And we're all about that, arguing for the sake of heaven.
I love a good old argument, you know me, I like that. Now, the Masorti movement has been growing in particular, and in St Albans, is that a big area for you guys?
Surprisingly, I think to a lot of people it is. There's a lot of young Jewish families who are moving out of northwest London who, sometimes it's for economic reasons, they want a little bit more space, or they're going to have a family and they need a little bit more room. But it's also sometimes just culturally, they're just not finding that the northwest London Jewish community suits them any longer, and they're looking for something a bit different and a bit more open and a bit less judgmental often, because a lot of them have had negative experiences growing up in synagogues. So in a lot of ways we feel like kind of a halfway house for people who find their way to the countryside relatively and are looking for Jewish life.
If you just join me, you're listening to BBC Three Counties Radio. In the studio, Rabbi Adam Zagoria Moffat, we're talking about the Masorti denomination. It's part of a form of Judaism.
It's your station.
BBC Three Counties Radio.
Nana Akua for beds, hearts and bugs.
Good morning, BBC Three Counties Radio Sunday Breakfast. I'm Nana Akua. It's Faith Uncovered, and we're uncovering the Masorti denomination. In the studio, Rabbi Adam Zagoria Moffat. He was just explaining to me about the growth of this particular formal sect of Judaism within St Albans. And I'm wondering, actually, in terms of, you said that a lot of people sort of come from London and decide, this is quite a bit more flexible, a bit freer and everything. So things like the service, is it in Hebrew or is it in English?
It's primarily in Hebrew, which reflects that traditional bias in a lot of ways, but there's a lot of things to help someone access it if they don't have those Hebrew skills. The text is always translated. The Siddur, the prayer book, is in Hebrew and English. The sermon, of course, is in English. And actually, a lot of people, even if they don't have those skills, tend to appreciate the just listening and the sound and the traditional
Yeah, sounds
aspect of the
lovely.
language.
You've got that nice.
Yeah, there's some fun consonants.
So give me some stuff that
The
you might.
chet is often the consonant that people find the hardest.
I can do that though, 'cause I'm always hockling.
Yeah, there you go. That's
It's
really
easy
good.
for me.
When you start doing it, you spit on your friends a lot. So it's a really beautiful language, and Hebrew is the key for us to Judaism.
Do you speak fluent Hebrew?
Yeah, I mean, I spend most of the time reading, but I can get by in Israel all right. Although I sound like something out of a Shakespearean novel, I think, because my Hebrew is very old-fashioned by virtue of spending most of my time reading the Torah and not reading the newspaper. But Hebrew is absolutely essential for us, for Judaism, because it's the key to everything. Yeah. All of our text, all of our tradition is embedded in Hebrew.
I would have loved to get you to read a passage or something from one of your services or something. That'd be great. I'd love to hear the language, but also the kind of, what it's like in a synagogue. And because a lot of people haven't had the experience of going to a synagogue. I've never been into a synagogue. Right. So what are the rules?
There's no real rules per se. I mean, anyone's welcome to visit, although unfortunately, because of the nature of life today, we have to be really nervous about security. So if you ever do want to visit a synagogue, make sure you let them know before you go so that they have you on a visitor's list. And once you go there, really anyone's welcome. You'd be surprised if you're used to going to church, especially how little decorum there is. People generally are kind of wandering around, sitting down. The service is long. Okay. For us, it's usually 9:45 to 12:15 or so.
12:15? No, that's like 3 hours.
2.5 hours usually.
2.5 hours, quite some time, isn't it? So you can get up and wander around.
Yeah, people do have a wander, I think. Sometimes, they go and talk to a friend outside. And sometimes people are just sitting there with their eyes closed, listening or reading a book. And it's very kind of make it yourself, which is what we like. And the main emphasis of what we do in the service is read the Torah on Saturday morning on Shabbat. So we divide up the Torah into little sections, which we read each week.
Torah, not Torah.
Yeah, the pronunciation is meant to be Torah, but it's hard to say in an English context.
Torah, love. It is easy if you think of it like that.
It is, I guess.
I can do it, Torah.
Yeah,
if you tell
there you
people
go.
that's
where that accent is. That's it.
So that's what happens, and in there, 2.5 hours. What's going on in that time? Just somebody. Is there any communal thing happening? Do you have any bread or anything like that? Or?
No, there's no food during the service. There's always food after because you can't come to any event at a synagogue and not be fed. But the main part of the service itself is really the Torah reading, and then there's kind of a bit beforehand that's prayers, usually psalms, quotes, or poetry from the Torah, and a bit afterwards that's the same. So we kind of like working out, right? We have the main event that you want to focus on. You have a warm-up and a cool-down, and that really helps to structure it for a lot of people as well, because they can see that as part of their own journey on a Saturday morning.
And you mentioned food at the end. Is there always food then?
There's always food.
Well, they have food at the end of the synagogue. Everyone can have something to eat.
So week to week, we take turns kind of providing sort of a stand-up mill-about lunch for people after the service.
Oh, that's very nice.
There's never been an event I've been to at a synagogue where there wasn't food. Usually unhealthy food, but always food.
There's always food. And do you have to pay money or do anything? Or is because in a Christian church or Church of England, they I don't know whether they do it in Church of England actually, but they pass around a little bowl and people put money in. Is that?
We don't collect any charity, any tzedakah is what we call it. We don't collect that on Shabbat because we don't handle money on Shabbat. So instead, synagogues operate quite differently, which tends to be more of a kind of membership model. So people who want to be a part of the community donate a certain amount each year, and it varies, and it's usually whatever people can afford to pay. And that helps keep the lights on and keep us running.
Oh, really? So that's how it works for yours as well? People will just pay some money each year.
Yeah. So usually it's kind of monthly direct debit as a donation rather than when you come to synagogue. So actually no one handles any money when they come to synagogue, and that's really important to us because that's one of the things we don't do on Shabbat is use any money, buy anything, any commerce.
Is it? So talk to me through some of these traditions then. Shabbat.
Yeah.
Yeah. So what does that mean?
So it's the day of rest, right? And it's not an unusual concept to most people.
What day is it? Is it Saturday?
Well, we count the days differently.
Okay.
Our calendar is entirely different, and to us, we count the days from when the sun goes down. So it's Friday night when the sun goes down until Saturday night when the sun goes down, and as a result, it's kind of the basis for the weekend, right? The whole idea of a weekend comes from the Torah and from this idea of Shabbat. And it's meant to be rest, and we quantify that in a particular way, which is usually not cooking, not driving. There's a list of restrictions, which can feel very overwhelming for people. But the idea is to give you an opportunity to take a break, which is so hard to do, right? To have 25 hours.
That's very good, actually.
Where you have no phone, where you don't get in your car, where nothing is beeping or buzzing or dinging, and where actually you just get to spend some time with your family, read a book, take a walk, It's a pretty rare thing.
Do you
And
look forward to that?
I really do. I need it.
Yeah.
And the only way it happens, by the way, is if we kind of religiously mandate it, right? Because there's so many other things on our attention drawing us into those technologies that for us to take a break from it, we really have to make a big effort.
So do you switch your phone off?
I
Completely switch it off?
I relish the moment on Friday afternoon.
Goodbye, people. Goodbye, world.
Exactly. We made dinner. We've set the table. Often we'll have people over, and we light candles to start Shabbat. And just before we do so, power off that phone, put it on a bookshelf, and don't look at it for a day.
But how does that work in the real world then? Because obviously that's a lovely. I would love that concept. But in the real world,
Yeah. I mean, I can't say that the majority of people in our community do exactly that, but I think most people do make an effort to try and restrict their exposure to those things. And obviously there's some people who can't, right? In Israel, where you have a lot of people who are observant of Shabbat, hospitals still run, doctors are still on call.
Of course, yeah.
But as we said before, right, it's not an all or nothing. It's a journey, and different people are at different points in it, and they find their own way to do it. But as long as we all agree that we're on the same path, that we're all trying to do the same thing, then there's a lot of room for diverse practice.
Because somebody could come to your house on Shabbat and then their phone rings, you're like,
It happens. We don't judge anyone. We don't shame anyone, because
Yeah.
that's not going to help anyone grow. If the idea is to grow into that practice, to have a spiritual discipline, judgment and shame doesn't do any good.
Oh wow! Do you know that's such a good idea? It should be in everything, but everything's. It used to be Sunday was a day of rest, but now everything's open.
Yeah.
It's like you can't. I'll go to Asda. Oh no, that's so I'll go shopping. I'm going to do this. Everything is open. And you went to university, didn't you? You had when you went there, you didn't have much interest in Judaism, so there's been a bit of a change because that wouldn't have been that long ago.
That's right. So it wasn't that long ago, and it's quite an unusual story for someone who becomes a rabbi, because you would think that if you're going to become a rabbi, you've grown up in a traditional family with all of these things I've described day after day all around you. And the truth is that just wasn't my background. I had a very secular upbringing, didn't really have any exposure to Judaism growing up, although I was Jewish technically. I never really did much. And it was only once I got into university and I started exploring religion for myself, and I really thought about things, that I realized that I could find a vision of Judaism which really suited me. Because I'd only seen the extremes. I'd only seen really extreme Judaism, really Orthodox Judaism, which scared me from a philosophical point of view, or really liberal, secular Judaism, which seemed like, why bother? And it was only actually when I found that middle ground that I'm now helping to create that I thought, okay, you can have this, it adds a lot to your life, it benefits you, and also gives you some sense of meaning, something beyond yourself. And for me, that was a really long journey, and it started really late. To apply to rabbinical school when I did, having only taken Hebrew in university for a couple of years, having only engaged with these texts which make up our religion for a couple of years, was pretty risky and frankly kind of dumb.
You think?
I made it.
You made it.
It was a big risk in a lot of ways.
Well, and so the Masorti, how many people or members does it have?
We've got our particular community has about 500 people, counting all the kids. Which is a really good size, and it's grown pretty tremendously. We're celebrating our 30th anniversary this year. So in 1990, it started because 3 families in St. Albans wanted to have a synagogue, and they just started meeting in people's front rooms, and then eventually in rented spaces and Quaker meeting houses, and carrying all the books from place to place. And now we're renting a full-time premises, and it's just grown and grown and grown in a way that for those people that founded it is absolutely unbelievable.
And it started here in St. Albans.
Yeah.
Has it spread anywhere else?
Well, we've got other Masorti communities the majority are in London. Actually, St. Albans is the only one outside the M25.
Okay.
So we're the outlier in a lot of ways, because it tends to be a very city urban thing for a lot of people to have this experimental type of religion. Usually when there's only one synagogue for 100 miles, that synagogue is going to be for everyone. It's only when there's the opportunity to have plenty that you can experiment a bit more.
Well, and so this Tuesday, what about someone like me though? If I wanted to come, I can come to synagogue. Could I convert to Judaism? Could someone like me convert, or can anybody convert to Judaism, or do you have to be Jewish?
No, anyone can convert. You can be Jewish either if your mother is Jewish, and that's one way in.
She's not Jewish.
No. So the alternative path is to then kind of join the Jewish people. And it's funny because it's an ethnic, religious, national group that actually you can opt into. And conversion is all about studying for us. It's not about a proclamation of belief as much as is learning. Because if you're going to live your life as a Jewish person, it takes a lot of time to learn how to do that and to develop the skills almost, and to understand what it means to throw your lot in with the Jewish community. Because it's a hard thing to do, right? We don't believe that we have any exclusive access to truth. So why would you necessarily think that this is the only way to go? We're really much more of an opt-in community of people who are sharing a responsibility.
And this Tuesday, because you're sort of you're embracing interfaith.
Yeah.
There's an interfaith evening at St. Paul's Church in St. Albans. Is that right?
Yeah, the 24th of February. It's going to be at 8 p.m. at St. Paul's. And we have the High Sheriff of Hertfordshire, Miss Sarah Beasley, who's really lovely, who spent her term this year as High Sheriff working on interfaith in Hertfordshire. And she's going to come and share some of the things that she's learned from doing that. And for us as a community, that work is really important, especially where we are in St. Albans. We're around the corner from a major Anglican church and around the corner from 2 major mosques. And our little community is really quite a diverse background, especially when people think of St. Albans, they don't think of that.
Well, listen, Rabbi, thank you so much for explaining
It's been a pleasure.
that to us. It's incredible, isn't it? It sounds wonderful. I sort of want to join, but I know that it's not as easy as that.
You're welcome to come by for a visit anytime.
I'd love to come to the synagogue. That's Rabbi Adam Zagoria Moffat. He's from St. Albans, the Masorti denomination. And you can find out more about the St. Albans Masorti Synagogue online at all the W's e-SAMS, that's SAMS.org. Thank you so much for joining me this morning.